carrying on discussing an article I came across recently called "Is It Autism? The Line is Being Increasingly Blurred." So the psychiatrist Montreal has argued that the diagnostic criteria for autism themselves haven't changed over the years. The criteria has remained the same. Obviously, there has been slight updates, obviously, because the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, has evolved, but more or less the criteria hasn't really changed, does it? It's the same. But what has changed is diagnostic practices. The diagnostic practice has changed, but the actual criteria has remained the same. So that suggests that it's how the criteria is being interpreted which has changed. The criteria itself has remained the same, but psychiatrists are interpreting it in a more liberal, more lenient ways, and are in a sense applying creative license and are forgetting what the criteria should actually, what the criteria is actually about. They're being a lot more kind of creative. So 3 of the criteria are related to sociability, obviously, because autism is a social disorder. 50 years ago, one sign was a lack of apparent interest in others, okay? A lack of apparent interest in others being a very core autism sign, at least, in, across all development. Obviously it takes different forms. So a lack of apparent interest in others, preferring objects to people, I guess. I've talked about this a lot in my own experience, doing your own thing, problems with empathy. Well, we don't talk about that any day nowadays, because of course in the diversity movement, it's gone the other way now. But now apparently autistics have a surfeit of empathy. But no, the original definition, autistics, lack of apparent interest in others, self-state, essentially. Nowadays, it's simply having fewer friends than others. Now, yeah, obviously, this lack of interest in others, a repercussion of that can mean very few to no friends. But you can have a few or no friends for other reasons. Someone might have few or no friends because they're shy, because they have social phobia. That in and of itself can make interacting difficult. There are other reasons for having few or no friends, not just autism. And those other reasons for having few or no friends might not include a profound or innate lack of interest in others. Someone might have might have abundance of emotional affiliation and empathy ability. They might be very people-oriented, but still not have that many friends. But now, because of a dilution, because of the way in which the autism criteria is being maybe misapplied or used with increasing creative license, diagnosticians are in a sense, how can I put it? They're not really following the spirit of the process, or how it was meant to be originally. So interest in others can be measured in various ways. So, for example, making eye contact. Making eye contact, by the way, or a lack of eye contact or struggling with eye contact is one of the key symptoms of autism. Obviously, not all autistic people have that symptom, but it is a very, very common symptom in autism. But of course, shyness can also prevent some people looking at others. So although difficulties in eye contact are very common in autism, they're not unique to autism and don't always occur in autism. This problem, though, with eye contact, if they're in autism, can be because of this lack of interest in others. So if you're not really engaged in other people, you're not really people-centric, then you might not necessarily pay the same attention to them in terms of looking at their face. You might not be so interested in them. Maintaining interest in others might be more of a laborious effort. It's not your primary motivation, because your primary motivation is coming from the self state, which is autism. Then problems of eye contact could be a kind of ramification of that. But problems of eye contact can also come from other causes, such as shyness. That's what he's saying as well. Which again goes back to Uta Frith's comment, which I remarked upon in a previous video, that it is very treacherous to go from behaviour to cause. Because different behaviours can be caused by different things. Instead, you have to begin at the cognitive, which is why any good autism diagnostic assessment should involve cognitive testing, but of course not all does. And that cognitive testing should tap into theory of mind and interest in others and other things. Just to disentangle whether or not this is an autism malfunction or whether these behaviours are coming from other causes, such as shyness, for example. Because in shyness, you wouldn't expect to find these cognitive abnormalities. A person might be shy but have great social skill, but they can't actualise that social skill because they're inhibited because of their shyness, or introversion or whatever, which of course is completely different to autism, where the problem comes from an inability, a cognitive malfunction, which you would expect to see in different activities. To complicate matters further, the term autism itself has fallen out of favour, and it has become replaced by this all-encompassing, I can't stand the term personally, autism spectrum disorder. Oh, I'm a little bit on the spectrum. Oh yes, we're all on the spectrum, aren't we? A bit autistic, yeah, whatever. You know what I mean. It's wishy-washy language, I can't stand it. But yes, that's what's happened. The term autism has fallen out of favour, and it has been replaced by autism spectrum disorder. And this reflects a new belief that various different forms of autism exist, as opposed to, say, one disorder, which, or one kind of, malfunction, which can then manifest itself in varying degrees of severity, which I guess was the more old school interpretation. But nowadays, it's this idea that many different forms of autism exist. It is, of course, we mustn't rule it out that there may be different forms of autism, but when you have so many different forms and so varied and so varied from one another, it starts to become a bit meaningless. I mean, maybe it makes sense to have, verbal autism as one form, non-verbal autism as another form, autism with co-occurring intellectual disabilities as one form, autism without co-occurring intellectual disabilities as another form, but still autism, recognisably so. That might make sense. There are differences, but at the same time they do share the core cognitive dysfunction. It's just that this core cognitive dysfunction obviously takes different forms if you can speak, and you can have, intellectual ability as opposed to if you can't, but we could still say, these are different forms of essentially the same condition, right? But when you have so many different forms that bear no resemblance to one another at all, then it starts to become a meaningless muddle. And this meaningless muddle has even prompted some people to question whether autism exists at all. And yet, says Montreal, autism is a distinct condition. It exists. It's a distinct condition. And this has been shown through extensive scientific research over the years, but the changes in diagnostic practices are what have led to the false increase in prevalence. The changes to diagnostic practices, so the way the criteria is being interpreted. And that's what fueling the theories that autism doesn't exist anymore. Because autism now looks so different. You're even hearing some people, as I said before, saying that autism causes loads of empathy and abundance and empathy. That's completely different to how autism was originally defined. I mean, you've got to ask the question, is that autism or is it not? What is autism here? even though Montreal recognises there is a continuum between people with autism and those without it, so there is a continuum in a sense that, you can have certain features of difficulty without being autistic, as it were. So in that sense, there is a continuum between people with autism and those without it. I guess it's a bit like blood pressure in that respect. When does someone have high blood pressure? It's quite a kind of arbitrary thing, and yet we all know, again, a doctor will be able to know when someone has high blood pressure, when that's going to pose a risk. But at the same time, it's a continuum. It's not same with blood sugars, I guess. It's a continuum. But obviously there comes a point when it becomes so extreme that this is a danger. But obviously there is a kind of borderline point where it's a bit more ambiguous. So I guess autism is a similar thing, and in that respect. But Mortron says, yeah, there is a continuum between people with autism and those without it, but he believes that such a continuum could result from a juxtaposition of natural categories. So autism is a natural category at one end of a socialisation continuum. I guess a bit like, say, someone diagnosed with hypertension is like an extreme category which is a definable category, but it's at the one end of the extreme continuum of a blood pressure continuum, as it were. And obviously there might be people who don't have clinically diagnosed hypertension, but are still have blood pressure that might be entering dangerous territory, but aren't quite in that category yet, sort of thing. So yeah, maybe autism's a bit similar to that. Autism is a natural category at one end of the socialisation continuum, and we need to focus on the extreme if we want to make progress. I mean, it wouldn't make sense, would it, taking blood pressure as an analogy, to kind of include people whose blood pressure might be slightly higher than average, but is still in a healthy range. If you want to kind of blood pressure is actually probably a poor analogy. Maybe I should ditch that one. But yeah, basically what he's saying is, you get the idea, you get your gist, right? We need to focus on this extreme if we want to make progress. Obviously, autism's way more complicated than blood pressure, because blood pressure is just one dimension. Autism covers many, many different dimensions. It's a complex disorder, it's a syndrome. Including more participants in studies on autism, as it's currently defined, reduces the likelihood of discovering new things about the cognitive, brain and genetic mechanisms underlying a condition. Indeed, no major discoveries have been made in this field in the last 10 years. That's quite interesting. And if you look at a lot of the research studies nowadays, it's shocking to discover how many of them will include self-diagnosed people. That's going to be introducing a lot of noise into the data. It's like self-diagnosis has now become acceptable. If you ask me, any research that includes self-diagnosed people is shitty research. I'm not sure of any other conditions that do that, any other research for other conditions that do that. But yeah, we need to have more rigour here. Something has to happen, something has to change. I mean, yeah, there might be people with conditions that haven't even been recognised yet. Psychiatry is still young. Psychiatry needs to get up off its arse, and it needs to start actually working out what's what, because there's bound to be other conditions, other categories that haven't yet been unearthed, because brain science is still young. A lot of these people with difficulties, some of them will be autistic as a genuine definable category, which has had lots of research done into it. They will be the ones with a genuine developmental lack of interest in other people, I guess, and obviously brain science is still young, so they need to find out more. And obviously even within that group there are going to be, like I said, it's not even clear whether for people like me are in the same group as people who can't talk and stuff like that. But again, we don't know. We don't really know yet. But one theory could be that people like me and the people who can't talk with intellectual disability do have at heart the same malfunction. But obviously it takes different forms, because I can talk and I've got cognitive abilities that they don't have. That could be one theory, and that's plausible. But obviously you're going to see massive different outcomes, because of obviously I've got language and they haven't, and I've got cognitive abilities and they haven't. So you're obviously going to see massive differences in outcome. But you could say it still makes sense to say that that's autism because of the core dysfunction, which is the problems in interest and affiliation with other people in a self state. So you could say that that's kind of plausible. I'm not sure where I'm going with this quite, but there has to be some understanding of what that core dysfunction is, and if you're including people who actually have an abundance of interest in other people and can socialise perfectly normally, but maybe you have fewer friends than normal, well, if you're including people like that, it's getting way too blurry. As I've also said in a previous video, where I don't really care what condition I'm labelled with. So if in future it turns out that another label would better fit people like me, but I'd still get the same support and everything, that's fine, I don't care. I just want the science to be correct, and I want to know that research is being made, because that's what matters to me. I want research, I want good solid scientific research, because that is what is going to help potentially inform interventions, and that's what matters. So thank you for watching.